Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our webinar today about how to improve the success rate of your high potential program. My name is Danique Sopar, Marketing Manager for SHL Benelux and Nordics, and I will be your host for today's session. Before we start, can we just cover a few housekeeping rules? First of all, just to make sure that everyone can hear clearly and make sure that there are no disruptions on the line, we will be muting everybody for the total duration of the webinar. Unfortunately, this means that you won't be able to contribute by speaking. However, if you have any questions, please submit those via the webinar question box, which you'll be able to find in the top right-hand corner of your screen. We will go over some questions at the end, and of course, you can raise any questions with your account manager or one of us after the session. Just as well for your awareness, we will be recording this webinar and we will be sharing this recording with all attendees a few days after the live webinar. So now with the housekeeping matters out of the way, what I'd like to do now is to introduce Bert Simonis, Managing Consultant at SHL Benelux, who will tell you more about the HIPO program failure, the relevance for the business, and how to successfully implement a high potential program. Bert.
Thank you for the introduction, Danique. I don't know if everyone can hear me now.
Yeah, everybody
Normally,
can.
yes. Okay, great. Okay, thank you, Danique, for the introduction. So good morning, everyone. I will be the one managing this webinar session on how to improve the success rate of your high potential program. So in the upcoming 20 to 30 minutes, I will be giving you some insights on how to identify, how to benchmark, and how to secure the development of your high potentials within your organization. Now, before moving towards that, I would like to take one step back. I would like to take one step back and share some insights of research that we did through our leadership councils, being quantitative surveys of thousands of employees, but also qualitative research interviews with hundreds of HR executives since more than 10 years on the specific topic of HIPOs. And what we saw is that CHROs believe that HIPOs are 91% more valuable to the organization than the average employee. And they contribute disproportionately to the organization's future leadership pipeline. These data, they come actually from asking HRs and head of HRs on the data on HIPOs versus non-HIPO employees, and what is really the impact and the contribution on productivity within the workforce. So as we can see, your high potential employees tend to be your organization's most valuable asset. Now, from that perspective, let's also look towards what HIPOs are saying, actually. We see here on the slide, you see different quotes from real high potential employees that bring a little bit to life on what your personal HIPO program needs to deliver to retain actually your most promising future leaders. And of course, the first challenge is to select the right people as HIPOs. But when you look at these different quotes, what you also see is that your program needs to develop HIPOs in a specific way to manage those expectations and also to keep them within the organization. So when we looked throughout the research on what are really the barriers that organizations across the globe are running into when setting up and managing their high potential programs, we saw actually three main aspects coming into play. The first one was actually the identification of the high potential. What we see is that there tends to be a mix-up between high potential and high performance. And through research, we can tell that only 15% of a high performer population is also a high potential. So it is a challenge to really pinpoint this specific small number of employees to make sure you leverage optimally from the investment in your HIPO program. Secondly, what we also see is that 95% of all HIPO development programs, they tend to fail to drive development through to make sure that each high potential really reaches and leverages his own full potential. So if you think about all the time, resources, and cost organizations invest into HIPO development, this is really a big failure since the follow-through is not that great. And thirdly, as these identification and development programs tend to be quite costly, we see that a lot of companies do not realize the business outcomes or are able to quantify an ROI of their personal high potential program. Now, based upon these three main aspects that really, let's say, jeopardize the impact of your HIPO potential, of your HIPO population, we see that there are two root causes coming into play. First of all, that's a misidentification, what we see. And secondly, we see that there's a failure of making sure people reach their full potential. And these are the things we're going to cover also in this webinar. So what we're going to do is we're going to focus on two main building blocks. First of all, based upon research, how can you objectively measure and identify which individuals within your organization have the strongest potential to succeed at the senior leadership level? And secondly, how can you make sure you leverage all the investments you're making and you make sure people really pick up on the development by providing relevant and structured on-the-job training? So these will be the two main focus points of this presentation. If we now start with the first one, the identifying of the different factors that come into play, we see that on the right-hand side, what you see on this slide, is that actually a lot of organizations, almost half of them, really lack a systematic process to identify HIPOs. What we see that there are a lot of sessions called talent review sessions, etc., into place to discuss the performance of the employee and then point out who do you want to put into a high potential program, while we see it's not structured enough and not aligned with what will bring success towards the future. So let's have a look actually at the basis of the research, which is very interesting, is that we see that there are three main factors that come into play to define who really is in high potential within your organization. We see that there are a lot of high potential assessments on the market that focus on a narrow set of leadership competencies, things like agility, strategic vision, driving change, etc., etc. What we do, we tackle it broadly, and we also have concrete figures that I will show in a moment of how more successful is someone in a senior role when these three aspects are identified very, very at the beginning in the identification phase. First of all, we talk about aspiration. Aspiration is not motivation, but aspiration is also, do they have the drive and do they show some of the concrete behaviors that will lead them to get to a senior level role. If we're able to identify the ones based upon our research on the different aspects within aspiration, we see these persons are 11 times more higher have a higher probability to be successful in an executive position. Secondly, the ability. The answer to the question, will they be effective in a senior role? Because we've assessed so many people across cultures, time, functions, etc., we're able to fine-tune our assessment to the point that those identified high potentials were 12 times more likely to be effective in senior roles than those identified as a non-HIPO. And last but not least is actually the question, will they stay with you? When we will be investing into development programs for these individuals, it's important that we clearly have an answer on, will people do this within our organization, or are they keen to move to another, to a competitor or to another company to make sure they could also move there to a senior roles. So we have to make sure they will remain within our company. Now, let's look a little bit at the risks that are in place when we do not cover all the three aspects within the identification phase. Let's say we have an individual in front of us who's very engaged with our company. He wants to stay with us throughout the next years on long term, on short term, and is fully committed to where the company is going. He shows the engagement that is necessary. He shows also the aspiration to rise to senior roles. He shows the right behaviors linked to that. But on the other hand, we see a lack of ability. Through research, it is key that we will be promoting people that will not be successful on a senior role because they do not have the ability to do so. So we might be losing some good performers today to promote them to roles where they do not have the ability to be successful and to reach success. Secondly, these are the unengaged stars. So these within this population, we see people who have the ability to go to that senior level. They also have the right aspiration, but it's not really important for them if they do it here or with another company. So this would mean that we would be investing a lot while there's a high risk of turnover, and these people should maybe not be in your high potential program. And thirdly, these are the misaligned stars. So they have the ability and competencies to be successful at a senior level. They do have the engagement to do it with your company, but they do not have the right drivers in place or the right ambition to make it to the next level. So these are actually different aspects that are key in identifying the high potential employees. Let's now look at how we can measure it. First of all, aspiration. How do we measure aspiration? We measure what motivates someone and their natural styles at work. And if we then compare that to other solutions, these assessments do not simply ask participants if they want to be a senior role. No, we target specific components of aspiration that our research shows are associated with rising to senior roles. Secondly, the ability assessment combines work styles and cognitive reasoning measures. So it enables us to understand not only one preference for analyzing data, but also their ability to realizing data. As our research has shown that the predictive power significantly increases when you layer in this combination of preferences and cognitive reasoning to assess leadership competencies. And then to measure engagement, we offer actually two kinds of solutions. First of all, is that we have a clearly structured interview guide and committed scoring to make sure we can measure for each participant how strong is his or her engagement. Secondly, we also offer for more volume an online engagement questionnaire to make sure this can be managed online, and this is also for big volumes. Now, based upon these measurements, we get individual output on each individual to really indicate, is he or she a HIPO today? What are strengths, what are development areas, and what are suggestions to move forward with this individual's development towards the future? Secondly, also on an organizational level, we are able to benchmark the HIPO population. So what you see in this slide is a scoring with the orange bars of how strong a certain HIPO population of a client is, indicating strengths on leading and supervising and on deciding and initiating action. But if we saw that for this specific organization, it was key to, let's say, break the silos between departments, to work more together and to leverage more the best practices across the organization, they have a challenge in working with people. And they were less strong than the competitors that you see are the horizontal bars there. So based upon these insights, we are able to support you as HR to really pinpoint what are development efforts should you focus on within your program so that it's tailored to the group, but also possible to the individual level, that you can clearly see how can we get most out of the talent with the most targeted investment we can make within our programs. Now, we covered actually the first part, discussing really on how to identify what are three critical aspects to measure in order to get a full overview that you are allocating the right individuals to the right programs. Secondly, was a challenge, how can we make sure people develop in the right way, align with actually what is needed towards the future. Let us take a step back. Let us first of all discuss on how people learn and how do you need to learn in order to have a clear impact on performance. Because we can see that two things are important. First of all, if you look on the left-hand side, the exposure to the right kinds of experiences that provide opportunities to practice new skills. For, let's say, a high potential might be taking on a project that's failing and needs to turn it around. But exposure to this project is not enough. What really matters is this high potential able to extract the right learning from managing this project that will help him perform better towards the future. So the second part, learning extraction, has the biggest influence on really making a learning experience tangible and making sure performance is increased towards the future. And this is actually a challenge that we are running into. Because let's reflect now. How do we learn? First of all, we need to practice intentionally. We need to make time available on a daily basis to practice a new task, put some time aside and do it multiple times until we master that specific skill, knowledge, or way of working. Secondly, we need to stop. In our busy day-to-day jobs, we need to stop, think what went well when we were doing that specific task, what was still a challenge, and how will I try differently the next time. And thirdly, we need to get feedback. We need to get tangible results on how we approach that specific task in another way. How has it impact on the environment, on colleagues, on the business results, etc. To really get from multiple perspectives a clear, tangible result on what was the improvement in my specific task. Now, what we see also is that we don't take a lot of time to do so. We see it's very hard to make it tangible and to make time available to put these things into practice, but it is the best practice to do it in this way and to get to the best possible results. And how we traditionally do it, if we look at the 70-20-10 rule, actually where 70 comes from all learning from doing that I just illustrated. Secondly, 20% comes from learning from others and 10% comes from formal training. We see here in this graph that actually in real life it's the other way around. We tend to focus a lot on formal training and not on making the translation of that formal training towards day-to-day activities and making sure we improve our performance through application of those theories and techniques. So what we did is that at the bottom here, you see how our approach is different on how to support high potentials in making, let's say, day-to-day activities easier by providing guidance 24/7, just-in-time support to make sure they extract their learnings from what they are doing today in stretch assignments. So what we're doing through an online platform called Development Coach, we're putting the 70-20-10 rule into practice, and not by asking them to do more, but asking them to do it differently, linked to what they're already doing on a daily basis. Let's have a look at it. So to learn in the most meaningful way by doing, we need to translate competency assessment results into concrete work experiences so that it feels that it's linked to a day-to-day basis and we're not doing things on top and it doesn't take additional time, but it saves our time by doing things differently based upon best practice guidance. So starting on the left, it's important to understand that while competencies are individually assessed, they are not used in isolation on a job. Instead, Multiple competencies need to be used together to perform most work activities. Let's look at this example. When you have to lead a cross-functional team, which is a stretch experience for many high potentials, we see different competencies are used: relating and networking, persuading and influencing, and leading and supervising. So instead of making managers and employees figure out which experiences are now most developmental, we have created a unique algorithm to translate each person's competency scores into a prioritized list of experiences that will be most impactful for the person's development. So different work experiences are suggested based upon the combination of competencies each of the employee needs to develop. And what the result is that we provide action maps on the right-hand side that guide the employee in how to practice, how to reflect, and how to get feedback in areas that are successful and are critical for success. So when you have to lead a cross-functional team, for example, you need to collaborate effectively, communicate with impact, but also provide informal feedback. So the action maps really address these areas and provide the employee with 24/7 guidance on how to do that effectively. So let's have a look at it. So now I'm going to show you some screenshots from an online platform that is available for each individual, tailored to his or her own development, and to show you how we can make the 70-20-10 rule as concrete as possible. First of all, I've chosen this activity. It's an activity that's very common, that it's about providing informal feedback, because it really applies to many work situations. Please keep in mind that this is only one action roadmap I'm showing you. We have tons of activities clearly linked to those specific work assignments for your high potential in your specific context that can be tailored. So on the top half of the upcoming slides, you will clearly see what an employee gets that helps them to practice, reflect, and get feedback. And on the bottom half, you will see on the graph what is actually going on and what is happening on the job. So the first things you see here are specific things to practice, broken down in a very easy and manageable way. So when they would have to provide informal feedback, they would first click on one, and they would get a breakdown with more information. They would need to select 2 to 3 activities that this high potential will be confronted in the upcoming days to make it as tangible as possible. For example, I have a one-to-one meeting coming up, and I also have let's say a team meeting coming up where I have to provide informal feedback. When clicking on the orange things, I, as an HIPO, get support on how to give feedback. You get maximum one-pager guides with concrete questions, concrete tips and tricks on how to prepare that and how to put that into reality based upon scientific best practices on how to provide feedback in this example. So here you see a small snipe of what of the guidelines is on how to ask feedback. When you have prepared your feedback and you're giving feedback in that one-to-one meeting and in that team meeting, you will have time to reflect upon it. You can click and you can enter some reflections on how did it go, what were the reactions. So for example, I did it in the meeting, but I still, as an HIPO, got a lot of defensive reactions. So maybe I should ask more questions, because I got the tip to ask more questions in one of the best practice guides with informal feedback. So once I have done this and reflected, I'm going to expand actually the situations on providing feedback. So the next meeting, the next one-to-ones, I'm going to practice, bearing in mind what I've learned from the guide, but also what I've learned from my own reflections. After these upcoming conversations, I tend to stop and I want some more in-depth feedback. I really want to see what was really the difference in my behavior and how have I mastered this skill moving forward in my one-to-ones and in my team meetings. So I can click on the bottom feedback, where you already in different languages get sample questions that you can send right away to persons that you've interacted with that could see really the impact of your performance. You just need to put in your email address and you get tangible feedback. So here, by just you receive in the system clear feedback on how they experienced it or how you could improve even better. So bearing this learning in mind, you can even move forward, applying it more and more to then really see what was the eventual feedback that I got. So in the system, you get tailored guidance on how to negotiate, on how to create a climate of change, on how to provide informal feedback. I'm just giving some examples of tons of work activities that we have on a day-to-day basis that support you on approaching that situation in the best possible way, to reflect upon it, to get feedback on it optionally, to then improve your performance and get really up to the level that you have an impact from a behavioral point of view. So what we see is that this online platform, which is summarized here on this slide, provides guidance and makes it easy for people to take steps forward in their personal development, giving them development focus based upon the assessment results. So you have a clear focus on 1, 2, or 3 activities that not only are linked to one of the competencies that are key for your role, but also that are clearly linked towards what is your business reality today, so that you can practice and approach your current role even in a better way to make sure you optimize your performance. So as outcomes on this slide, I have shown the process, what we have done actually now, if you would log into the system and you would use it to make your day-to-day activities simpler and more impactful. And at the bottom, you can see also a graph based upon 2 years of applying this tool that 87% of participants indicate they have a clearly positive change of behavior and performance towards the future. So in this 20 minutes, looking at time in 27 minutes, I have covered, first of all, the questions on how, based upon research, to identify your high potentials. And secondly, once identified, how can you provide targeted guidance, developing them in the best possible way, making sure they have an increase of performance and they acquire new skills on the job. I don't know if there are any questions so far on all the things that I've covered.
Well, let me first thank you, Bert, for sharing these insights. It was really helpful. Indeed, we have some time left for questions, although I don't see any questions popping up in the chat box at this moment. So I would like to invite all to just send across an email if you have any questions left after the session. And for now, thank you for attending today's session, and I hope we can welcome you again in one of our next webinars soon. Thanks, and have a great day ahead.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Bye.